Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of my most anticipated horror films of the year, and that is Longlegs. This movie is directed by Oz Perkins, starring Maika, Monroe, Nicolas Cage, Blair, Underwood, and Alicia, Witt. And I was extremely excited for this film, mainly because of the vague nature of the marketing. I thought the teasers were great, and I think selling this movie based on the vibe and the tone of this movie alone was a brilliant idea. And keeping, Nicolas Cage kind of a secret going into this film was also, adding a lot to the mystery and the horror of this film, because you really don't know what to expect going into this thing, which I went into it, I watched it all, and I absolutely loved the vibe that this movie had. I was very much on this film's wavelength, although I do admit that this movie probably won't be for everybody, but like I said, I was so on board with this thing. And like most artsy indie horror films, there's a lot in this movie that you can pick apart and, find little details in, and it's very intriguing throughout the entire thing, and so I had to check it out a second time before I did my review, because I had a lot of questions walking out of the theater after first watch, and after watching it again, I have a lot of answers. So this will, of course, be a spoiler review for Longlegs, so if you haven't had a chance to watch it in theaters, I think the mystery and unraveling this film just as it is very much worth watching right away, and then come back here and let's get into everything about this film. So what is this film about? Well, essentially it follows Maika Monroe as Agent Lee Harker. She works at the FBI as an agent who helps track down these serial killers, and what makes her a very interesting character is the fact that she has she's described as being half psychic. She has this intuitive nature to her where she can look at all the evidence, look at all these clues for a very long time, and things just kind of fall into place. Or even if she's going door to door to try to find a serial killer, she can point at a house amongst a whole group of other houses that look exactly the same and say, I know that this is the one that we're looking for. And it leads to this character having a lot of very interesting interactions with everybody else around her, because she's clearly different from everybody else. She's very subdued, she's very quiet and awkward, and has this almost repressed nature to her performance, which makes her extremely engaging at the beginning of the movie. But as she is now tasked to look for the Longlegs killer who has been killing people for I think 30 years up until this point, and the evidence is very scarce because this guy doesn't seem to have any evidence of him ever being on the actual crime scenes themselves. They're all staged to look like murder suicides of these families, and it's extremely intriguing to see what this character is going to do with this group of evidence and how her past could potentially be tied into all of it. And so this movie is extremely intriguing right from the beginning, with a character that is very odd, that I think some people are going to be turned off by on first watch, because again, she's not the most outgoing and intriguing character like you had in, say, Silence of the Lambs. But the movie doesn't really hold back in letting you know the importance of this character. Even though she is very subdued, she has very much a strong involvement in this killer, right from the opening scene when you see this little girl being encountered and approached by Nicolas Cage's Longlegs character in a very unsettling and creepy scene. You get the idea that this is probably going to be Maika Monroe's character when she is younger, and that is eventually revealed to be true later on in the film. But you even have a scene where she's at her home and she hears something and she goes to investigate, and when she turns around and looks back at her house, you see the Nicolas Cage character walking through her home in a very eerie shot, and when she goes back inside, he left a letter for her that kind of gives her the information that she needs to be able to, decipher all the letters that he has left in all these crime scenes beforehand. And so you clearly know from the very beginning that she is involved somehow. She had an encounter with this guy when she was young, she survived whatever that incident is, and this killer knows her and is using her for some reason. And I think this really adds to the unsettling nature of this mystery, because right from the beginning that the trail of breadcrumbs that she's going to be following throughout this movie was placed specifically by the Longlegs killer for her to follow. And so there's an impending sense of dread around this entire film's just atmosphere, and the editing and the cinematography and the way that they film this character and the way that she interacts with all this evidence. You just have this sense of doom throughout the entire thing, knowing that whatever path she goes down, it's probably going to end in a very bad way, because this killer is very meticulous with the way that he places all these things, even though he doesn't really seem too meticulous, because he seems extremely out there and extremely unhinged as a Nicolas Cage performance, which we'll get into him in a second. I think the way the mystery unravels and the way that she finds the CARRIE character and the way that she tells her what direction to go, and the dolls and all this stuff that she finds along the way, are very much placed by this killer for her to go down this path. And like I said, I did decide to watch this film a second time before doing this review, and I'm really glad I did, because the unraveling of this mystery, the breadcrumbs that she's following for the first half of this movie, when you go ahead and watch it again, a lot of those details mean a lot more after the revelation that you get later on with, the mother character, because when she goes to visit CARRIE at the mental institution, and, she says that she recognizes her, and there's this really eerie way that's like, oh, I know you visited my house when I was younger, you or at least somebody who looked extremely like you, and that is, of course, her referencing her mother going over over and being the accomplice of Nicolas Cage's character throughout the revelation of the ending of this movie. And those little details like that just make everything else that come afterwards just mean a lot more, and everything beforehand mean a lot more as well. Like when they find the doll in the house and knowing that this little thing inside its head is a little piece of the devil that is left behind in this thing that Nicolas Cage placed inside the doll that he makes. And all these little details just add up to everything that happens towards the ending of the film, which I think is very appreciated. I think the attention to detail that the director had in writing this script was extremely intriguing. So let's get into Nicolas Cage's performance as the Longlegs killer in this film, because it's a very interesting one that I think is going to polarize a lot of people, mainly because there's a lot of times in this movie where he does these weird things. He starts singing, he starts dancing, he has these very odd mannerisms to him that is almost funny. I think if you were on sets with him as he's doing this thing, I feel like you'd very much laugh at what he's doing, but with the editing and the sound and the way that his voice kind of turns almost demonic at times, when the more he goes on, the more he sings at the top of his lungs, it kind of shifts before the movie cuts away to do something else. I love that effect to it because it turns something that you're kind of looking at and you kind of want to laugh out of nervousness, and then it becomes utterly horrifying. And I think when you have Nicolas Cage in a performance, you can either get the really subtle side of him like he was in Arcadian, which is earlier this year, which was kind of like a lower budget version of A Quiet Place. If you go ahead and check that movie, I think it's okay overall, but his performance was really good in that, versus him in this movie, which is the unhinged Nicolas Cage type of performance that you love to see from him. And so I think he has a great range of, performances in his career. He's in a lot of really bad movies, he's in a lot of really great movies, and I think that he very much fit the tone that this movie was going for. And again, I was so unsettled by this guy because of the unpredictable nature of whatever he was going to do. And one of those most highlighted moments in this movie for me was the flashback when, he went up to Lee Harker when she was a little girl and does that little dance and starts singing. I thought that was terrifying. When he's in the car and he starts screaming and singing, I thought that was also terrifying. And there's also the makeup done on Nicolas Cage, which really did add to him being unrecognizable in this role, because he is very different and out there in this film, and it was all the better for it. But of course, when all the evidence that Lee Harker was following throughout the entirety of the movie led to her house and she saw the Polaroid inside of that chest, and that scare also was completely terrifying. I think that there's 3 moments in this movie that just gave me full body chills, and that was definitely one of them. Absolutely horrified me on first watch, and even so the second time around I still got, I didn't jump at it, but like again, the chills just flowed through my body. It was so effective both times that I watched this film. And when you see that he was very much tied to this character, and when she used the photo to be able to track him down, he was arrested, and you had the interrogation scene that was teased in the marketing as well. There's a great trailer where they just had Maika Monroe's heartbeat play as she goes to encounter him for the first time. All that stuff was really great to see from the marketing as well. And that entire scene was extremely effective because, again, this character has this very weird and kind of like higher pitched, soft nature to his voice. But then he goes really dark and low, and he lowers himself in the frame as he's talking about the devil, the man downstairs. And I thought all that stuff was extremely terrifying, like really, really great stuff. And of course, this entire interrogation scene is going to be extremely impactful, not only to the audience, but also to the film itself, because this is our 2 main characters that we've been building up this entire time to encounter each other for the first time here in this sequence. But especially on rewatch, there's a lot that they say in this sequence that's, you look back at, and after all the revelations that you get in the third act, just make a lot more sense, because he's kind of rambling off on all these different things at first that you don't really get to piece all together. And he's saying like, oh, you're going to knock at the door, and here's a gift from the church, and all these little lines that he has, and it says that, she will have to accept the gift, and if she accepts the gift, then she is going to be forever doing the bidding for the man downstairs. And all these things, when you get to piece together what it all means, is extremely interesting. So let's break down the ending of this film, which I thought was extremely intriguing. And it took me a second, because it's one of those endings, kind of like I Saw the TV Glow, where it ends really abruptly, and you kind of sit there and you think, oh, is that it? I feel like there's more story to tell. But when you think about it, I think that the ending actually means a lot more than you think at face value. So how does it all go down in the ending of this film? Well, when Nicolas Cage smashes his face down into the desk, which again, absolutely mortifying way to end that entire interrogation sequence. But once he does smash his face and he is seemingly out of the picture, well, the only loose end that we have is the mother and the information that she can possibly have to figure out who the accomplice is. And like I said, she is the accomplice. So and there's a really great scene where the other agent drives her back to her home, and the mother sneaks up behind her in a great shot. Again, the cinematography in this movie and the way things are just either alluded to, things being in the background. There's a lot of shots where there's an empty hallway or an empty doorway where nothing does happen, and so when you have a scene where she's sitting in the car, now finally something is in the background, it makes it just that much more effective. And Lee's mother just shoots her directly in the head. It is extremely brutal, and just this character and the coldness of her and the way that it is explained that she's simply trying to protect her daughter this entire time. That is a deal that she made with the devil, and that's exactly how the whole Longlegs killer works. Is he's not there in the actual crime scenes because he's getting other people to do the dirty work for him, just like the devil is getting him to do the dirty work for the devil, because that's how the devil works in media, in I guess in just life in general. If you do believe in the devil, if you believe in God, if you believe in all these different things, the devil doesn't do the dirty work. He makes you do the dirty work, which damns you into hell and lowers you down, like Nicolas Cage explained in that monologue, which again, great monologue, but that is how essentially it all worked. And so all those years ago, when the Longlegs killer approached Lee Harker as a little girl and encountered the mother and tied her up, he offered her the deal to accept this gift of this doll in order to do all these things. She has to protect this doll, and then Lee's character will be protected throughout all the time, and in order to keep this deal, she needs to go around and give the gift to other people, forcing other people to make that same choice. And all this is told in a really great way of exposition of the mother, basically telling you once upon a time story, once Lee's character is passed out, which I'll get into also how that stuff works in a second here. But the way that the exposition is told and the way that this is all explained in the actual film itself, and the way that it's shot in the 4:3 aspect ratio and it has a very filmic look to it, I love all that stuff. I ate that stuff up. Like I said, artsy indie horror movies are very much my thing, and when it comes to other artsy horror movies that came out this year, like I Saw TV Glow, which that film I think is more of a coming of age story. It has a lot of great, themes about identity and nostalgia and all these great things. I have my review out for that film as well if you want to check that out. I think this film is kind of the opposite of that, where this is straight up horror. This is straight up suspense, straight up terrifying imagery, straight up disturbing sequences like the mother going around and killing all these families. There's a lot of really horrific stuff in this film. But there's another revelation that you find out here in this sequence, where the intuitive nature that Lee Harker's character has had this entire time, the psychic ability that she has had, has been the devil inside her head the entire time. Because of course, when the mother accepted that gift of this doll, it had the piece of the man downstairs inside of her head, and that was the devil pointing her in the right direction. That intuitive nature that she had, the psychic ability that she had, the tap on the shoulder that she explained, is the devil forcing her, or not necessarily forcing her, but leaning her in the right direction, which again, the breadcrumb trail that she follows this entire time, really her entire life has been controlled by the devil, which just makes her ending just so much more tragic, because she really had no choice. And I think a great line, a great subtle moment in this movie that I caught the second time around was in the interrogation scene again, when Nicolas Cage says, once we found out that you were going to go into law enforcement, we had a great laugh about it, talking about him and the devil, which just adds to the tragedy and to the irony in the situation, where this character who is being pointed in the direction by the devil this entire time goes into law enforcement to try to stop it. And the irony is that she can't stop it because she's being controlled and manipulated this entire time. Her family was destined to follow down this path, and it was just that much more tragic. But speaking of tragedy, let's talk about Blair Underwood in this film, who was Agent Carter, who was kind of the mentor, the other FBI agent in this film that was by Lee Harker's side this entire time. I really loved his performance in this movie. I don't know if I've seen him in anything else. I think he had a big career in TV or something like that. I'm not quite sure exactly what it was, but he was phenomenal in this film. I loved his presence throughout this entire thing, and just the way that you got to know his family, I felt it was very natural with him talking about the case and drinking and having Mike Monroe's character drive him home and introducing her to his family and saying that her birthday was soon, that it also took place on the 14th. I think he should have been a lot more horrified and just terrified about this entire situation, knowing that he has a daughter that is essentially in the circle of, I guess, the victims and the families that have been killed by the Longlegs killer. He was squarely in the demographic of who was going to be targeted in this. So just so much more tragic to see the fact that the mother, after she shots the doll of Michael Monroe's character and essentially freed her from the devil, and she goes on to the next group of people, and when Lee Harker goes there, they're already done, which was kind of explained that as soon as the veil is lifted and the gift of the doll is presented to this family, there is nothing you can do to stop it. And you can see that the characters break. You have Carter and his wife, and you can see the pain behind their eyes, and you can see their smiles crack every once in a while. It just is such a great way of how they were directed to perform in the sequence that was just so much more tragic and horrific. And it all ends with the wife being stabbed by Carter, and of course Lee had to shoot Carter's character, and she was forced to also shoot her mother, which was just another great moment in this movie. The shot of her lying on the couch with the blood splatter on the glass was another great shot from cinematographer, which I think it was his first feature film that he's done the cinematography for, which, god damn, that's such a great job in this film. And it all ends with Lee Harker having the gun, having the little girl by her side, and she points it at this doll. And this is where I have a question for you guys, the audience, to leave your comments down below, because the very ending of the film, once everybody else is dead and it's just her and the little girl and the doll left in the room, you hear a clicking of the gun, which I'm not sure if that was her trying to pull the trigger and it just wouldn't shoot, and she just can't get rid of the devil in this scene. I think that is one direction that it could go, but I think it's also alluding to the fact that she is now the one who has to make the choice to accept the offer from the devil, like her mother had to do before her, and her putting down the gun kind of signified that this is now her deal with the devil. She can't get rid of this thing. She has to do exactly what he says in order to protect this little girl from death. And I think that just makes it much more attractive that she is now destined to follow the same footsteps and to do the same terrible things that her mother had to do. And the irony of her being in law enforcement just makes it that much more heartbreaking, because I think it is all going to end up being pinned. You found the accomplice being the mother, you took her out, you got rid of Longlegs, the killer, and now everything seems to be wrapped up, at least to a legal standpoint. And so now she is free and loose to do the bidding for the devil once again, which, again, I think the ending, like I said at the beginning of the review, you can see it as a thing that seems very abrupt, that you can scratch your head at saying, oh, I don't really get how it did end. But I think alluding to the fact that she's going to continue this on now because the devil had forced her to make this deal is horrifying. And I think that this being the payoff to the film, and watching back a second time and seeing all the little clues kind of sprinkled in throughout the first half of the movie, and the unsettling and off-putting performance from Maika Monroe, and all these different clues that you get to see, especially watching on the second time around and picking up on things that you didn't notice the first time around, just makes the ending and this payoff so much more impactful, because it is a very intriguing ending. And some people, it's going to confuse, it's going to be very, maybe it'll feel unsatisfactory to some people, but I think if you came here for an explained video, I implore you to rewatch this movie and to pick up on all these little details, because I think this movie does get better the more that you watch it, the more you unpeel the layers of this film that I thought was extremely well done. And on top of that, just the craft of this movie, the cinematography, and the editing and sound design in specific, this movie really did get under my skin in a way that, Ari Aster films have gotten under my skin in the past. I don't really get scared from horror movies too often, but the fact that I got full body chills like 2 or 3 times throughout this movie, both times that I watched it, is just a testament to how much it did get under my skin. And, maybe you're going to walk away from this movie thinking that it is a bit silly. I've heard a couple of reactions being that way, or if it's a little bit too weird for you, I do understand that. But if you are on this movie's wavelength, and if you like the artsy type of horror films that, Oz Perkins in general has made in the past, like his Gretel and Hansel movie is way too weird for the mainstream audience, and being a weird, twisted fairy tale version of that story, it's kind of crazy that movie even got made. The Black Coat's Daughter is also a really great film that you should go check out if you want to see more from this director, but I think this movie was just the pure, the best version of the films that he's made in the past. It really is a home run, and I cannot wait to see what he does next. But those are just going to be my thoughts on Longlegs. Like I said, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video to see more reviews just like this one. I have reviews out for A Quiet Place Day 1, for Maxine, for I Saw the TV Glow, a bunch of horror movies that I've talked about here on the channel in the past few months, along with my weekly Acolyte series, which I've been having a lot of fun talking about, despite the conversation around that show being as exhausting as any conversation around Star Wars usually is. So definitely subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.